What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to talk about today, as we've seen really every single operational model just ramp up and quite frankly explode in terms of development with the tropical wave that is currently tagged by the NHC. We have this tropical wave south of the Cabo Verde Islands that, kind of as I predicted, is using that area of convection over here in the intertropical convergence zone to kind of use it as fuel and kind of use it as a good start for a potential area of organization right there. And we're still watching a lot of that mesoscale convection going on off the coast of Texas and Louisiana, as well as some other areas that we're going to go ahead and talk about. But our main focus for today's video is going to be on this area of interest currently hovering over the central main development region. So let's go ahead and show you the cliff notes right here. Here's the situation. We now have a 40% probability of development in the next 7 days. It was at 20% last night, then at 2 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, it jumped up to 40%, and man, things are really starting to escalate right here, because here's the situation that we have. A tropical wave over the central tropical Atlantic is producing signs of disorganized showers and thunderstorms. Environmental conditions appear conducive for gradual development of the system, and a tropical depression could form by early next week, while it moves westward at 10 to 15 miles per hour and approaches the Lesser Antilles. The system is then forecasted to move westward to west-northwestward across portions of the eastern Caribbean Sea during the middle portions of this week. So that's the new news that we have for you right here, as now the NHC is expecting this system to enter the Caribbean Sea, and that is not some very good news, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason I say it's not good news, and we will get to this later in the video, is because the conditions there are really good for tropical development. They're actually the best in the Caribbean Sea and the Western Main development region than anywhere else at this current point in time. But 40% probability of development in the next 7 days, near zero in the next 48 hours, that's to be expected. So we'll have to pay attention to that aspect of it. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and show you the satellite imagery. We're going to go ahead and zoom in on this real quickly on the central Atlantic over here. What we have going on, what we're noticing is a lot more convection is starting to fire up. We see that area of rotation that's currently moving over there. And what we continue to notice at this current point in time is we're seeing more and more of that convection. I was kind of predicting something like this was going to be going on as we start to see that really strong rotation just continuing to persist, and we're also noticing more and more convection forming at the center of circulation, as well as some more on the western side of it that is likely going to merge and allow for the system to get bigger and breathe a lot better. The whole system is full of convection right here, and that's already a pretty good first step for a tropical wave that just yesterday didn't have anything forming near the center of circulation. Curiously, I want to go ahead and see what we were looking at over the last 90 frames or so, because we have seen some skipping in the frameage, as you can probably tell. But here's what we had last night. We finally started seeing convection firing up during the evening. I was kind of expecting it to kind of form and then die off, but no. It's actually persisting, and it's actually doing a pretty damn good job organizing and developing. So, yeah, that's some concerns, and that's some heightened urgency I have right there, especially as this is going to be affecting people, potentially tens of millions of people, based on some of the model runs that we have, as we have the Lesser Antilles moving into the Caribbean Sea, potentially going to impact Haiti and the Dominican Republic, potentially going to impact Cuba, and potentially going to impact the United States. And that's the main thing we're paying attention to right now. If you are watching this tropical wave, you're going to need to watch this like a hawk if you're in the Lesser Antilles, as right now where it's at is in actually some pretty decent conditions of organization and development. Of course, it's going to take time. It needs to crawl before it can walk, and then it needs to walk before it can run. Right now, it is crawling, and it's already off to a good start on the races. It's already off to a pretty good start with the crawling portion of it. Let's see if it can walk and form into a tropical depression in the next little while. So that's the main thing we're watching right now with the satellite imagery. I also want to go ahead and pull up the water vapor as well, as where this area of interest is. It's in an area of very high moisture. Yes, there is dry air to the north of it over here, but where it's at is it's an area of very high moisture content. And based off of what I'm just seeing with this map, it's going to be like this all the way into the Lesser Antilles. So that aspect of it is very good for its tropical development. And I think that's part of the reason we're starting to see that convection really starting to fire up and ramp up. And granted, there is other areas of convection. That's mainly due to the intertropical convergence zone. But where the wave is intertwined with the ITCZ, it's really persistent and really pronounced over there, even into the afternoon when diurnal min starts to pick up. And ultimately, you typically, with the sunlight, you typically don't see as much convection firing up. So ultimately, what I'm going to be paying attention to is what happens tonight and what happens in the next 24 hours after that, depending on what will happen. If something continues to go off tonight and we see more and more convection firing off on all cylinders, as we're already starting to see, which is pretty concerning to say the very least, then we might have some big trouble on our hands, and we'll have to pay attention to that. But that's the area of interest tagged by the area NHC. The area of interest that I'm paying attention to that is not tagged, we can go ahead and show you over the Eastern Atlantic. This is where it's at right here. What we've kind of seen is kind of a remarkable shift over here, where we kind of had pretty much a area. Okay, let me go ahead and go back to this very quickly. We had our area of convection. We had our tropical wave over here producing a ton of convection as it was coming off the coast of Africa. And then after a 5-hour skip in the GOES satellite data right here, this is where the majority of the convection is. And ultimately, it executed its role of finding another source of convection flawlessly and early. So that's something you're going to need to watch over here. And a lot of models pick this up and having this organized and developing too. Granted, it won't be affecting as much land, at least in the short term. Even the Cabo Verde Islands aren't going to be affected by it as much over here. But the bottom line is this. It's in an area of very good conditions and a lot of areas of good tropical development. It's in a very moist pocket over here. It's an area of relatively low wind shear, and you aren't going to be seeing outflow just yet from this system. If you already saw that in the NHC hadn't tagged it, that would be pretty concerning. But right now, based off of this satellite imagery, it's off to a good start. It has a really good starter kit, and that convection that kind of started to fire off on the southwestern side of the wave really took over and is kind of what I'm looking at, the main blobular type of system that we're seeing right now, and we will have to pay attention to it, not just for the fact that this could organize and develop, but also for shipping concerns and all that, because I know a lot of that's been goes on around this time of year, so we are going to have to keep close tabs. Let's go ahead and show you a whole Atlantic-wide setup to kind of give you that synoptic scale view of what the moist air component's going to be looking like right here. There is a lot of moisture. Once again, we got to reiterate this. A lot of moisture between now, where this tropical wave is, until the Eastern Caribbean Sea, and that's going to persist for the next few days. Like, just to understand, where it's going to be at in the next 7 days is in a very good pocket of moisture, very low area of wind shear, and a good amount of warm water. And we will get to that in just a second, but I just wanted to emphasize that to you guys, because what's been kind of saying what I've been saying, and I also said this in yesterday's video, the Caribbean Sea needs to be paying very close attention to this. The Lesser Antilles need to watch this like a hawk. Hispaniola needs to watch this like a hawk. Jamaica needs to watch this like a hawk as well, as I've seen some runs have it far enough south to impact over there, and some of the European runs want this thing to move north of there and impact Cuba, which, guess what, means Jamaica is going to be affected by this. So, yeah, I'm going to have to talk to Weather Girl Danny about that, kind of get her take on it, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But ultimately, that's our three main areas of concern. We're also watching the Gulf of Mexico as well, more or less of a long-term threat, as the long-term ensemble runs, the vast majority of them that have it impacting anywhere in the United States want them to be at least in the eastern half of the Gulf of Mexico. I know some ensembles want this to move east to Florida and be over there. However, a good rule of thumb, in my opinion, is unless we see a complete collapse of the steering currents this week, which I personally do not see that happening unless a trough out of nowhere forms, it's a Caribbean system typically will either end up in Central America or in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's almost always the latter unless the Bermuda High is so strong in the case of Hurricane Dean and Hurricane Felix, especially Hurricane Felix, where it just barrels into Nicaragua and kind of dissipates over land. So that's some stuff you need to pay attention to, because now we have to pay attention to the steering currents. We have to pay attention to the conditions, which we will get to right now. Here's the water temperatures that we have for you right here. Where the system is right now, where this area of interest is, it's in an area of 29 degrees Celsius. That's 84 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the United States. And where it's going to be moving into is in about 29 to 30 degrees Celsius waters. We're already seeing some 30 degrees Celsius readings just west of the center of circulation right now. And ultimately, that's something we're gonna have to pay attention to, because these waters are gonna pretty much couple with the low wind shear, gonna allow for this system to drive, because there's not gonna be much dry air to stop this thing for the next 7 days at least. And ultimately, it's kind of given one of the best starter packs you will see this hurricane season. So 30 degrees Celsius water just to the west of it. You're seeing 29 to scattered 30 degrees Celsius waters across much of the eastern Caribbean Sea. And if this system ends up moving into the western Caribbean Sea, then the system will be entering even better waters, and that'll be a whole new ball game determining on what happens and kind of how this whole thing plays out. So that's at least the water temperatures in the main development region. Another thing I'm paying attention to is the water temperatures where the other tropical wave is. It's in a bit of cooler water, around 27 to 28 degrees Celsius, which is about 81 to 83 degrees Fahrenheit. Not too bad, really. It's not too terrible for tropical development. The magic the number is around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, although it can happen in water cooler than that. And we've seen several instances of it happening cooler than that. Around 77 degrees Fahrenheit is when it can happen. Hell, it can even happen in 75 degree Fahrenheit water, which is about 24 degrees Celsius under very rare circumstances. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. That's kind of besides the point. But I just wanted to get that point across just so that way you kind of get an understanding of what I'm looking at and why I am watching this like a hawk. Looking at the western Atlantic, once this system moves into the Caribbean Sea, it's pretty much has a ton of moisture and a ton of warm water to work with. And I'm only going to highlight this quickly, but if this system ends up entering the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to be its entry point's going to be kind of interesting. If it ends up moving through the Yucatan Strait, it's going to be moving right through the loop current, and that's not very good. Especially with all the warm water and ocean heat content that's over there. Granted, the wind shear patterns are going to be fluctuating up and down in the Gulf of Mexico. Not sure what they're going to be like. It depends on every single forecast I've been watching once the system enters over there, but ultimately, that's generally a bad sign if you think about it. And the ocean heat content, I haven't even really talked about this too much yet, but here's what we have on the OHC for August 29th, 2024, the 19th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina making landfall in eastern New Orleans and making a second landfall in Mississippi. Here's the ocean heat content. Where the OHC is, where the area of interest is right now, is about 50 OHC. Based on already some of the early indicators, it's taking advantage of it. And it's also taking advantage of the other conditions that we mentioned previously. So it's already tapping into that warm water, and convection across that wave is firing off on all cylinders. Not saying it's going to persist for pretty much the entire time, but when you see convection firing this early and it's persisting this much into the day, it's usually not a one-time thing where it cycles back and forth. This is usually relatively sustained, and the NHC needs to pay attention to this. But in the meantime, it's going to be moving into even better conditions in terms of ocean heat content. You're going to see a massive spike up to 100 plus OHC around 50-ish degrees west in longitude. What that ultimately means is if the tropical system, let's just play devil's advocate here. Let's say if the tropical system develops in a couple of days. Not saying it's going to happen. It's very unlikely it's going to happen, but let's just say that for craps and giggles. As soon as that enters that area of 100 plus OHC, depending on the structure and the organization of it, it's going to take off. That's just the reality of the conditions we're seeing right now. But the thing that's really concerning me is once it enters the Caribbean Sea, it has very deep 30 degrees Celsius waters in these areas over here, as well as even deeper waters over here in the Western Caribbean with 175 plus OHC. This has been untapped since October of last year. I just wanted to emphasize that to you, and I was talking to Weather Center Nazario about this, but if it enters the Caribbean Sea and with the conditions that we are seeing, which couples with the wind shear of that we're seeing, look at where it's at. It's an area of 5 to 10 knots of wind shear. Best wind shear you can ask for it. And where it's going to be heading, it's going to be in a very good area of wind shear for the next several days. These are probably going to be one of, if not the best times where we're going to have conditions like this. These are probably some of the best conditions we are going to see this season. And it only takes this little wave over here to take full advantage of that, with everything triangulating, as well as the fact that the vorticity ratings on this system is through the roof. You're going to see a situation where its system is going to take full advantage of the conditions it's given to it. It arguably already has. And that's the main thing you got to pay attention to. Let's go ahead and show you the ensembles over here. This is the 0Z European from last night. The 0Z European, look at all these ensembles right here. The majority of them, once it enters the Caribbean Sea, really have this system take off. Now, granted, it's a little too early to indicate if this is going to stay in there or go out to sea before it impacts the United States, but the vast majority of the models are leaning that way for this thing entering the Gulf. That's not very good. And considering the fact that a lot of the ensembles, especially the southern ones, really want this thing to ramp up and strengthen at a very considerable rate, that's pretty concerning. And that's just the European ensembles right there. Don't just take it with a grain of salt. But I also need to show you the operational runs as well, because these are pretty interesting to take a look at. I really wish I had the 0Z European to show you that on here. I can actually pull it up on Pivotal Weather, as a matter of fact. Let's go ahead and show you this. Here's where we're at 150 hours out. This is where we're at. This is in the Caribbean Sea. It's already organizing and already intensifying at a pretty quick rate. Gets up down to hurricane strength as it moves south of Hispaniola, really takes its time to organize, and then ramp up as it heads towards Jamaica, makes either a landfall or very close past to that, then moves south of Cuba as a 966 millibar hurricane. That's not an ensemble, folks. That's the operational European. That's concerning. Let's go ahead and show you the GFS as well. This is not just one run either. The GFS also has the system organizing and developing, gets this down to a 991 millibar system, makes landfall in Hispaniola, and then kind of dissipates and moves into the Gulf of Mexico from there. That's another run. Here's the CMC. Let's go ahead and show you the 0Z CMC. CMC is also showing this consistency. Rapid intensification is possible, moves through Cuba, and then moves in through East Florida. And then let's go ahead and show you the Icon run. Icon continues to be very persistent. It has the system organizing east of the Lesser Antilles, and then moves through as a tropical storm, and then intensifies into a Category 1 hurricane as soon as you enter those great conditions. These are no longer hypotheticals at this current point. These are no longer rogue ensembles. These are all operational runs. And the fact that we are seeing this, we saw such a massive jump last night, should raise everyone's red flags right now. This season is about to ramp up, and this season is about to go haywire. Once again, thank you for watching this video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with us at Storms United, be sure to join our Discord server. We are absolutely talking about all of this. Link will be in the description, as well as the end screen, which will be coming up in a few seconds. Shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor Patreon. If you want to come join my Patreon and support me personally, be sure to do that. It's the first link in the description down below. And I will be streaming tonight as we continue to gather all this data and information. The timing's going to be a little bit uncertain. I'm not going to be doing scheduled timings tonight, but there will be a stream tonight. So with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.